An open drain runs right along West Delhi neighborhood. It doesn't just hold garbage and sewage, but something far more dangerous. Its still waters are the perfect breeding ground for the Aedes aegypti mosquito, tiny carrier of the dengue virus. Bimla says because of the mosquitoes, someone is always ill in her family of 11, and they've all had dengue at some point in the last few years. Her granddaughter even caught it in February, when it should technically be too cold for the mosquito to breed. And last year her daughter-in-law got dengue and has still not recovered.
ये घुटने बिल्कुल बेकार हो गए। बहू से बड़ी वाली से मेरी चला नहीं जाता। डेंगू हुआ जब से उसको, ये पोती का हाल हो रहा मेरी का। बहुत कमजोरी आ गई इन घुटनों में से चला नहीं जाता माँ बेटियों से। बहुत परेशानी हो गई, खिचड़ गई थी बिल्कुल। बहुत समय लगा सर, 6-7 महीने से भी ज़्यादा लग गए थे।
Dengue has no known cure or treatment. It is also called breakbone fever because of the severe muscle and joint pains that occur during infection, as well as high fever.
It's like a tsunami coming, a big tsunami coming and going off. What happens during that? It destroys your organs.
Dengue cases in India have been steadily rising since 2020, reaching what some call epidemic levels. Last year, the country recorded nearly 290,000 cases, 50,000 more than the year before. And in the first 6 months of this year, the total tally has already surpassed 32,000, nearly double of what was reported in the same period last year.
Eradication of dengue means, first of all, we have to eradicate the mosquito. We have to keep our surrounding clean. Source has to be controlled.
In some parts of the capital, New Delhi, anti-dengue drives have begun. Officials are spraying insecticides into open drains to kill mosquito larvae, using a dense white fog of chemicals to fumigate mosquito breeding hotspots. They're also trying to spread awareness among residents with the message, cover it up.
ज़्यादा कॉमन तो ये वाटर स्टोरेज का प्रॉब्लम है। दिल्ली में कई जगह पानी की समस्या है, जहाँ पर लोग एक घरों में 10 से 12 कंटेनर रखते हैं। अवेयरनेस के कारण काफ़ी जगह प्रैक्टिस में आ गया है कि लोग कंटेनर ढक के रखें, पर अभी भी बहुत प्रॉब्लम्स हैं। लोग कंटेनर को ढक के नहीं रखते हैं। मेन इस बीमारी का होता है कि मच्छर से फैलती है। अगर हमने प्रॉपर मेजर्स नहीं लिए, कॉजेज़ हमें नहीं पता चला, तो क्लस्टरिंग ऑफ डिसीजेज हो जाती है।
During South Asia's monsoon season, the tropical weather and widespread waterlogging give the Aedes mosquito perfect conditions to thrive. Not just in India, but in Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, dengue cases are now being reported throughout the year in far higher numbers. Experts say global warming, which has led to an extended monsoon season and higher humidity levels, is to blame. Some experts also point to rapid, unchecked urbanization in South Asia, where thousands live in densely populated enclaves without proper water supply, sanitation, or waste management systems, and where stagnant water often collects in the streets.
Make sure that there is piped water so that people don't have to store water in cans and jars, number one. And number two is areas which are prone to waterlogging, those could be addressed, even through maintenance.
But those are long-term measures, Bimla says, that don't immediately solve the problems she and her neighbors face. They want officials to ensure the drains are covered and anti-dengue measures are taken throughout the year and not just when cases rise.
These ornate insects might look pretty, but don't be fooled. Spotted lanternflies pose a very ugly threat to the environment.
If we look in here, we've got a ton of spotted lanternfly instars.
Like many urban green spaces in New York, the bugs are swarming Randall's Island Park. Staff here are following state guidance to try and clamp down on the situation.
We're helping people identify them and squish them so that their populations can stay balanced.
First detected in the United States a decade ago in Pennsylvania, spotted lanternflies were likely transported from China on imported stone, their eggs disguised as a smear of mud. They quickly spread, hitchhiking across the country on trucks, cars, train wheels, even backpacks. Put simply, people have helped them to get much further than their tiny wings alone would allow.
The big fear is that it could spread to the West Coast, where the grape growing region is hugely economically important. in the billions of dollars. We're talking California, Oregon, and Washington. So they have already started preparing for how to deal with that.
The flies can seriously harm crops, sucking the sap out of dozens of species, which affects both the yield and quality of produce. In Pennsylvania alone, they could drain the economy of at least $324 million annually. Plus, quarantine requirements add bureaucracy and costs for growers. As you can see, there are dozens of spotted lanternflies nestled in this New York wetland. Over the past 4 years, their population has swelled, wreaking havoc on the natural habitat here. What makes them such an effective invasive species is how quickly they've been able to adapt. Research shows the insects that have made it to America are much more durable than their native peers in China.
For animal or plants, they're facing some very novel environment. They're gonna adapt to new environment. Some may failed. They cannot survive in this environment. But for the spotted lanternfly, they're high reproduction, made them so successful.
It's not just lanternflies exploring new habitats. Global trade and human activity are increasingly transporting a variety of species around the world.
What's the maximum and minimum temperature the bugs can tolerate without causing them to death?
Only those who can handle the heat will survive. For every species thriving in their new environment, 9 others aren't.
It's really only been in the past 50 or so years that people have really started to appreciate how much humans are altering the course of evolution and how rapidly we're doing it.
Scientists say urban animals are subtly changing from one generation to the next in order to survive. Ultimately, though, their fate will be in the hands of humans and what they decide to do with the natural world around them.
A warning cry that can barely be heard. Even though they are a protected species, there are now less than 4,500 mountain lions, also known as cougars or pumas, in the whole of California. Only a dozen are left in the Santa Monica Mountains. They need a lot of space, and some end up roaming just outside the highly populated city of Los Angeles. Many have been killed by cars as they try to move around.
So if you're trying to wander to find food or mates or shelter in an area where you have to cross some of the world's busiest freeways, it's not a good scenario. And indeed, what the National Park Service research over 2 decades have shown is these guys are going to literally vanish from this landscape if we don't do something.
Wildfires are also becoming more common. US Forest Service data released at the start of June says more than 115 million people, more than a third of the US population, are in areas facing high wildfire risk across the country. Blazes that impact animals and their habitats too. Species like mountain lions have died in such fires because they can't escape the raging heat. One solution is on an accelerated timeline, a public privately funded bridge being built above the 101 freeway in Agora Hills to make the largest wildlife crossing in the world, stretching 65 meters long. The top of the structure will be covered in nearly 1 acre of native vegetation, including coastal sage scrub and oak savanna, allowing a wide range of species, from monarch butterflies to mountain lions, to escape fires and get from one habitat to another that would otherwise be cut off, a solution to help them coexist with humans.
I am convinced connectivity is key to climate resiliency, to the biodiversity collapse. We need connected and healthy ecosystems. But coupled with that is the other thing you referenced, coexistence, right? We used to write off our human spaces as appropriate for wildlife. The #1 threat to wildlife worldwide is loss of habitat.
The Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing, named after a philanthropist who helped fund it, can't come soon enough. The US already had a heat wave in the first week of June, with temperatures topping 43 degrees Celsius in the southwest, more than 4 degrees higher than usual. Extreme weather linked to climate change. There were a number of heat domes across the US this summer, where the high temperatures linger for days or even weeks.
New data shows that dozens of US cities had the hottest season on record, from the west to the Gulf across to the northeast.
Vulnerable wildlife needs human solutions to overcome man-made problems. There's hope here as a fractured biodiversity hotspot is being reconnected, with mountain lions leading the way.
A lot of the birds that we see.
It's daybreak in Austin, Texas, and as the sun begins to peek through the buildings, a small group of bird enthusiasts gathers. They haven't come to birdwatch, but rather to search for birds that have died in the middle of the night.
So one of the buildings is over here.
Victims of mid-air building collisions.
It's not glamorous work because you're getting up very early and you are looking for dead birds, but it's important work.
The data gathered gives researchers important insight into how light pollution is impacting bird migration. Texas's sky is an avian superhighway, funneling billions of birds south in the winter and then north again in the summer. But rapid urbanization is throwing them off course. Tall, brightly lit skyscrapers luring them to danger.
Birds use the moon and the stars to navigate. And so when there is a lot of light pollution at night, that can be really confusing for birds. They might get disoriented, and once they're in the city, they are subject to all sorts of urban threats, especially window collisions, building collisions.
Glass buildings are particularly lethal. Birds can't distinguish whether the trees and sky they're seeing is reality or just a reflection. Last October, more than 1,000 birds died in a single night after crashing into McCormick Place in Chicago.
Experts believe as many as 1 billion birds die from building collisions every year, removing an important link in the ecosystem.
Birds are so important to our habitat. They eat insects, they are pest controllers. They're a good marker of a healthy habitat all around. And so we want to have clean water, clean air, and so birds can help us monitor if our environment is healthy.
Birds also play an important role in fighting the effects of climate change. They disperse seeds, spreading plants to new areas. They provide nutrients to marshes that serve as a buffer from storm damage. Some even help pollinate plants and reduce the spread of disease. But since 1970, the North American bird population has been in steep decline, and there's real concern about the broader knock-on effects.
You're looking at the ecosystem regeneration, right? Because if that seed dispersal doesn't happen, then you might see the plants die where they are. If you're talking about the plants and trees, it's not cleaning the air in the same way. It's increasing the temperature because they're not capturing carbon, which is increasing the temperature of the ocean. So it goes and it goes and it goes, and it has a massive impact on climate change.
In a bid to reduce the mortality rates, cities across the United States have joined the Lights Out campaign, an initiative encouraging building owners and residents to shut off their lights between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m., prime migration time for birds. Research has shown a simple flip of the switch can reduce collisions by up to 60%. Adding decals to windows to make them less reflective or simply shutting the shades can also help. With less light pollution from cities, birds are less likely to fly into urban areas like Austin.
I don't see anything over here.
Finding nothing, the kind of success this team is ultimately searching for.
Welcome relief from the summer heat, but this is only a respite for water buffalo farmers and their herd. There are deeper issues bubbling beneath the surface.
الفلاحين بالنسبة لهم يعانون من شغلة المياه، مياه جوفية يسحبون القاع، مرة تجي ومرة تقطع، هاي يسوون براي من جوا القاع، يخلون المطارات تقطع ما يجي، لأن يقول لك مياه ماكو بالبزل، البزون ناشفة ما بيها ماء.
The Euphrates has fed the Fertile Crescent for centuries, But upstream dams, outdated methods of irrigation and climate change are starving the supply of water here in central Iraq. Officials say water flows in the Euphrates and Tigris rivers were down roughly 70% last year compared to previous decades.
6 years ago, farmers here say that the river was at this level. As you can see, it's receded dramatically. And with temperatures regularly well over 40 degrees Celsius, like it is today, it's easy to see why.
Sarhan Jabbar Tahir's family has been rearing water buffalo for generations. He cares for 200 to 300 of them currently, making a living off their milk. But a changing climate is eating into his profits. Officials say Iraq has lost a fifth of its farming land over the past 20 years, making water more scarce and pushing up the price of animal feed.
الجفاف عندنا وقلة المياه شوية فصعد العلف وين صعد هسه كان ب 280 290 صار ب 400 الطن علف الحشي شوي مقلل شوي الخضار كله سبب المياه مياه شوي قليل صعدني شوي جفاف.
It's not just buffalo farmers that are feeling the heat. A year ago, Abdullah was catching fish here. Today, it's more dust bowl than fish bowl. In a bid to preserve water, the government stopped areas like this being irrigated and used as fish farms. Abdullah says 2,000 lakes in the area now lie barren, drying up a key source of income.
إيقاف الثروة السمكية أثر علينا سلبا. نحن لا نستطيع أن نعمل أي شيء مثلا. لا نستطيع أن نذهب من مهنة إلى مهنة أخرى. بالتأكيد إحنا مهنتنا هي الثروة السمكية. فالسمك هو مقبول عالميا. كان من المفترض أن السلطات تفتح تصدير في الفترة التي كثر فيها وأن نستغل هذا العامل. لكن السلطات كان استخدامها سيء.
According to the United Nations, more than 140,000 people across 12 regions in Iraq have been displaced due to environmental factors. They rank it the fifth most vulnerable nation to the effects of a warming world. With roughly 1 million internally displaced people in Iraq after years of conflict and instability, UN officials say climate change is hampering recovery efforts.
When you have issues of drought and water scarcity and food productivity, then this will take resources away from recovery and investment in infrastructure, or even now the biggest need is housing for IDPs because their houses were destroyed.
The UN is working on the ground to help the country with water conservation, capacity building and adaptation efforts to help mitigate the impacts of climate change. Farmers fear it's just a drop in the bucket. Those here are looking for action that will help turn the tide and protect their way of life.
Located near the port of Rotterdam, these giant arms of the Maasland storm surge barrier have been guarding the southern coast of the Netherlands for the past 2.5 decades. Fully automated, the barriers shut down on their own when the sea level rises above 1.5 meters, protecting the country where 40% lie below sea level. Now, there are only 2 storm surge barriers like this in the world. One is in St. Petersburg, another one here in the southwest of the Netherlands, guarding the entrance to Rotterdam. Now, in 1991, it cost the Dutch government almost €500 million to build this, another €10 million a year to maintain the structure. This storm surge barrier forms part of the Netherlands' massive flood defense system to protect the low-lying delta region where most of the Dutch population and economic activities lie.
Well, the biggest concern is our country is now 40% is floodable. We prepared our country, the maximum we can resist is levels from 5 meters above normal sea level. So when sea levels will increase, we have to adjust systems. It's okay for now, but you have to look for the future. We are already busy. What will be that in the country for the year 2100?
Despite the extensive network of dikes and dams, the Dutch flood defense system, he said, won't be able to withstand the tide if sea level continues to rise. While the Dutch is planning ahead, its researchers are urging other countries to do the same due to flooding caused by unavoidable sea level rise. And in particular, the Southeast Asian region, which is at serious risk of losing infrastructure and low-lying coastal settlements.
And people think with climate change and sea level rise that they have plenty of time. But this is the time to study it and to make the right decisions. And I would encourage ASEAN to move towards, well, indeed, more awareness, but also collaboration within the region. They can learn from each other, like we can also learn from them.
Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Indonesia, including Malaysia, are hotspots prone to flooding and coastal erosion.
In the whole city of Bangkok is extremely vulnerable. With 2 meters relative sea level rise, some 28% of the Thai population and 52% of the GDP will be affected. So for Thailand, it should be very obvious to work on a long-term plan, whether they make decisions of protecting the city or moving the city or whatever, but the study should be already there.
Recently, the Dutch Knowledge Institute, Deltairs, set up an online platform and invited young diplomats from ASEAN to share their thoughts on tackling climate challenges.
It's very important to look at what the countries need instead of us telling them you should do what we think you need to do. So by getting their ownership of this process, we can really work towards their highest priorities.
And the Dutch experiments with floating buildings and coastal protection can serve to guide ASEAN's bid to battle rising tides.